All right, well, welcome everybody. My name's Chris Knight. I'm the communications director at North Country Community College, and I want to welcome you all here to our second installment of North Country Live for the spring 2021 semester. And as those of you that have been with us before know, but for those who are new to the program might not know, North Country Live is a series that the college started back in the spring of last year when COVID had sort of forced us all inside, and we wanted to find a way to still engage with people in our communities. And so we came up with this idea of trying to put together a series of Zoom programs that shine a spotlight on a lot of different topics, all kinds of different things. So in the past, year and a half, over the course of about 24 of these sessions, we've hosted programs on Adirondack history, on wellness, on personal finance. We did a whole series on the environment and the outdoors last spring. And then this fall, we've decided to pivot to arts and music, which is kind of a nice switch for us to something a little bit more light, but still just as important and as interesting. So we've had about 25 programs so far. They can all be found if you want to watch any of them on our website that you all had to register on to get here, which is nccc.edu/live. So the fall semester of programs is sponsored by the North Country Community College Foundation. Want to give them a little bit of a shout out. And then I also want to introduce the folks that are going to be with us here tonight. Before we do that, I just want to remind folks that if you could keep your microphones on mute. Those of you that are participants in the program tonight, panelists, don't have to worry about that. But for those of you that are in the audience tonight, it'll help things move along smoothly if you can stay on mute. And then at the end, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to join us and post a question in the chat. You can actually do that during the program, and we'll try to get to it while our speakers are wrapping up near the end of the show. So first, I just want to introduce the folks that are co-hosting with me tonight from the college. And first is Tina Lamore. She's the chair of our art department. And hi.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being with us, Tina. And also with me tonight is Elaine Taylor-Wild. She's an assistant professor of art here at the college and one of our co-hosts too. Hi, Elaine.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So let's introduce our panelists tonight. So tonight's program is capturing the Adirondacks in photography. And I want to give a shout out to the three folks that we have in this Zoom room right now. We have just a wealth of, I would say, experience and expertise and knowledge when it comes to photography in this one space here right now in kind of different areas of photography as well too. So that's kind of something I think we'll be able to explore a little bit as the program goes along. So first I want to introduce Mark Kurtz. And Mark, I'll have you say hi really quick so you pop up on the screen for people.
Good to be here.
Thanks for being with us. Mark is for more than 30 years, Mark has been providing Saranac Lake, Lake Placid, and the Adirondack region with outstanding fine art, commercial and event photography. His gallery of fine art, black and white photography located in Saranac Lake boasts hundreds of handmade prints and also serves as a base camp for his commercial and event photography services. Mark received a BFA from Alfred University, and he's taught photography in high school, college, and in workshop environments. Mark is one of the founding members of the Adirondack Artists Guild and Saranac Lake Artworks. He's widely recognized as one of the Adirondack region's preeminent artists. So glad to have Mark with us tonight. And we do have a lot more to talk about in terms of your background too. That's part of your bio that I want to ask you guys to each talk about as we get to you. Also with us tonight is Brendan Wiltsey. Brendan, thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone.
So Brendan is a visiting assistant professor at Paul Smith College and serves as the water quality director at Paul Smith's Adirondack Watershed Institute. He has a PhD in limnology from Queen's University and a Bachelor of Science in Field Biology from Paul Smith's. Among a lot of things Brendan has been involved with recently, he's led research on road salt impacts on Mirror Lake in Lake Placid, which led to a statewide road salt reduction task force. I know a lot of folks have read about that. Brendan's career is focused on merging science, communication, and management to protect freshwater ecosystems. He's a certified lake manager through the North American Lake Management Society. And he also has a keen interest in conservation photography. His work has been published in regional and national magazines. Recently, he worked with Northeast Wilderness Trust on a project that raised over $1 million to purchase the Eagle Mountain Preserve, which is in the Eastern Adirondacks. Brendan serves as the vice president of the Waterman Fund, associate director of the Adirondack Lakes Alliance, and he's also a board member of the Northern Forest Atlas Project. Brendan, thanks a lot for being here. And also I want to introduce Nancy Batalia. Nancy is a resident of Lake Placid, an avid outdoor enthusiast. She's been documenting Adirondack lifestyles, scenes, sporting activities for 30 years now. She's a frequent contributor to Adirondack Mountain Club publications. Her stock and assignment photography has also appeared in National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, the New York Times, and all kinds of regional publications too, like the Adirondack Explorer and Adirondack Life. Her collection exceeds 100,000 images, reflecting nature's beauty, human energy, rustic charm, life in the mountains, the spirit of place, and all the hardy people that live there. She's photographed 12 Olympics now, which is a pretty amazing feat. I actually got to hang around with her a little bit at the Sochi Olympics when I was back in my reporting days not too long ago. So Nancy, I want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us.
Ciao.
Excited to have you all here. I want to just begin, I think, by asking, each of you, and we'll kind of go in the order I introduced you in, Mark first, just to talk a little bit, if you could, about, your background initially. We are going to get into some advice and tips and techniques, I think, that everyone in the room could benefit from what you all have done in the past. But Mark, what was it that kind of sparked your interest in photography? When was that? How did it become a real passion for you?
What actually sparked it, I wouldn't be able to remember. It was so long ago. It's about 14, I think, when I did my first darkroom work. I grew up, so to speak, on film. And so the first time I worked in the darkroom, I was in elementary school. It was a Friday afternoon program that the school offered. And then I took it in high school. And when I went to a community college back in the Rochester area, I took a photography class. And I always found myself just doing photography. It just intrigued me. I liked it. In my late 20s, I got a little more serious about it and decided to go back to school and went to an art school and really focused on developing my abilities as a photographer, and graduated in the mid 80s. Went into teaching art and photography at the high school level, but I really wanted to do photography full time. I had no idea how to get into it. So I resigned from teaching after about 3 years, and just without having any idea how to get started, got started doing photography professionally. And I've been doing it ever since. It's just something I just really have always liked to do, all different aspects of it. The commercial, the professional, the art, just going out for walks and taking the camera with me, whatever. I just like using the camera.
We could tell from your background there, obviously, that it looks like a photographer's studio background right there.
It's a
one. Brendan, same question for you. What your interest is, obviously, as we mentioned, conservation photography, and I'd like you at some point, it could be now or later, to talk a little bit more about that in particular, how that's been an interest of yours. We got a phone call coming in. But Brendan, tell me a little bit about your background. How did photography kind of become an interest for you?
Yeah, so I was lucky, sort of similar to Mark's story, that I was exposed to it in high school. Had an art teacher, his name was Mr. Pipe, and they offered a photography class, had a big dark room, I think like 8 enlargers in there. And we had this wonderful art department in our high school, and I took that first class with him. And they actually had 3 photography courses offered at my high school, photography 1, 2, and 3. And so for 2 years, my junior and senior year of high school, I took those 3 courses and then did an independent study because I just couldn't pull myself away from being in the dark room. And that was around the time that digital was starting to come out. But I think like a 4 megapixel DSLR at that time cost like $6,000 or $7,000. So wasn't something a high school student was going to be using. And so after graduating high school, I didn't have access to a dark room, so I built one in my dad's basement, and continued to shoot black and white film for a couple years after that. And I put the camera down for a couple of years in college because I wasn't around anywhere to do film work. And then picked it up when I was working for the Adirondack Mountain Club as a summit steward, and sold all my film stuff so that I could buy a digital camera. And really just wanted to share the experiences I was having by spending 5 days a week on the top of Marcy and Algonquin, and felt like it was important to try and share those experiences with people so they'd feel connected to those places, maybe if they never had the opportunity to visit them. And that's sort of everything has sort of evolved from there. I'm not a full-time photographer. As you mentioned, my full-time job is science research and teaching, but I do it spend a lot of time on it on the side, and I've over the last few years just really focused on helping to tell conservation stories for nonprofits. Having worked in that field for a long time, they need all the help they can get. They often don't have much of a budget, especially like really small nonprofits like the Northeast Wilderness Trust that you mentioned. So finding creative ways to work with them to tell their story so that their projects can be successful.
That's terrific. Excellent. And I love that that's your passion. That's the sort of mix of everybody in the room tonight is interesting in that way. So let's ask Nancy the same thing too. Nancy, what what kind of sparked your interest in photography? How far does that go back? It sounds like, is it similar to the gentleman here in the sense of school was a starting point for you, or did it come later than that?
It was pretty much school and family. My mother's side of the family took a lot of pictures and had a lot of cameras, so we did a lot of family snapshot type stuff. And then when I was a junior in high school, I had to decide what I wanted to go to school for, what was I going to go to college for. So I happened to be I grew up in Geneseo, New York, and there's a state college there, and they did offer a photography course. So when I was in high school, I went over to the college and asked the professor there if I could audit beginning photography. So that was my first real photography course, was when I was in high school in Geneseo. I was taking basically beginner photography. And so then for college decisions, I applied to Syracuse University because they offered various photography programs. So I ended up going to Syracuse. I do have a degree in photography. Not many people do that anymore, but I have a degree, and I also stayed on and worked on my master's degree while I was there. But when I was at Syracuse, I was shooting a lot of sports. I worked for the sports information director, and I also picked up a lot of UPI wire service work. They would hire students to do most of the sports, but also if any news or featurey stuff was happening in the Syracuse area, they would work through the Newhouse School. So I picked up a lot of experience there. And then after I had finished all the coursework for my master's, I was approached by the folks at the Olympic Organizing Committee in Lake Placid. So this was January of 1978. So I came to Lake Placid and interviewed for that job. And I had been recommended because I had shot sports, and they said they wanted somebody who knew winter sports. Well, of course, coming out of Syracuse, winter sports is basketball and wrestling. It's not bobsled and speed skating and all the snow stuff. But anyway, I was hired for that position. So that was my full-time job, being the chief still photographer for the 1980 Olympics. And that lasted for 2 years through the Olympics. And then after the Olympics, I went freelance. And because I had made so many contacts working for the Olympic Committee, I was able to go freelance and pick up lots of publication work and things like that. So it just kind of grew.
Steamrolled from there. That's amazing. I wanted to ask, and you all can kind of jump in and answer this, whoever wants to first, because you've all mentioned education. And you said there, Nancy, that, not many people necessarily go for a degree in photography anymore. Why do you think that is? Or do you think it's still important, to go to school and learn the ropes in that way? Or a lot of you have, kind of learned on the go as well, too, just as well, I think.
I still use a lot of what I learned in college. I mean, the basics of photography, and of course, everything that was analog kind of did, go into digital. And once you started figuring it out, it was all the same stuff. It was just a different way to do it. I don't know in this day and age if you need a college degree to be a photographer. I think all you need is a cell phone.
Oh, I saw Mark roll his eyes there.
Right. And they're all agreeing. It's right. Yeah. It would help just to get the basics or to take workshops. But I'm also finding that a lot of professional photographers, when everything went digital, a lot of professional photographers started teaching photography workshops. So a big part of their work at that point was teaching and doing the workshops. And that would help boost their income that they may have been losing because of the decline in, actual monies for photography and for professional photography.
I would have to go along with the idea that I think going to school, if you're serious about photography, I think going to school is quite valuable. As I mentioned, I took a bunch of high school classes and initially a couple of college classes, but it wasn't until I went to art school that I really started to understand what photography was. And not so much the shutter speeds and the f-stops and that kind of thing, but understand what it is to make a photograph, and that it's more than just the technical stuff. And for me, the art school, I was only there for 3 years, but it was an absolutely transformational time for me. It really got me looking and seeing differently than the very typical or traditional way I had before that. And so that really changed my whole perspective on photography. And it really, it's where I launched from for the rest of, my photography career, both just as an artist and, professionally. Going to school was really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was also a really long time ago. And Nancy really, does make a good point. It seems that to be a professional photographer now, all you need is a cell phone and a computer and you're good. And the digital thing has had a huge impact on professional photography. And I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think in a good way.
Interesting. All right. I want to get into that, definitely. I did want to ask too, I mean, when you were growing up, each of you at all, were there, photographers that you had seen their work that, you kind of saw something and were like, wow, that's amazing, and I want to do that. I'm thinking, I was thinking of this earlier before the program, that when I was a kid, my dad had these books. They were like Time Life books about World War II. And, this is before cable TV and everything, really. And so I would go and look at these books and see the photographs in them, and some of them pretty graphic, and some of them, things that, as a kid really kind of stayed with you. And so that's our, sort of was my sort of introduction to, photography that sort of moves you in that way. So I wondered if each of you have any kind of moments like that, as young people are growing up with photographs or photographers whose work kind of resonated with you or influenced you like that.
It's probably cliche for me, and most of my work is landscape. So Ansel Adams was obviously influential early on. And then I think locally, Carl Heilman, when I first started, I looked at his work and looked up to it. As my path through photography has evolved, I still find inspiration from fellow photographers in the conservation world. Melissa Grew, who's her wildlife photography is just absolutely incredible. Max Stone, who photographs the Everglades, and does it really just a diversity of work underwater with alligators and birds, landscapes, people, all of it. And so those are the folks that have inspired me over the years. Just a few of them. There's others.
Yeah, there's about 1,000 different photographers that I look to and admire, over the years. I don't know as when I first got into it that there was, I don't think I knew the photography world that well to pick out particular photographers. Once I got into it, I started actually paying attention to these other photographers out there that had made great names of, themselves, what they did. And, Brandon, you referenced Ansel Adams, of course, is one of the classics, and, Minor White. And I guess I probably found myself really intrigued with a lot of people that really focused a lot on black and white photography. Certainly that's one of the things I particularly enjoy doing as an art form, is working in black and white. And I guess I probably gravitated towards a lot of the photographers that really did a lot of black and white work.
Nancy, any thoughts on that too?
Yeah, in the house that I grew up in with all sorts of cameras and people taking snapshots. My mother subscribed to a lot of magazines. So you were talking about, Life magazine. So we got Life and we got Look, and there were other magazines, and we got 2 newspapers a day. So there was a lot of visual that I was affected by, and it wasn't always remembering the names, but seeing the photos. And I think that holds true now is, I'll see a photo and say, wow, that's a great photo. And then I look for the photo credit. So it's not, as I say, always specific people, but, images stand out, and sometimes it's names you've heard of, and sometimes it's somebody new just popped up.
That's great. So before we get into some thoughts on, approaches and techniques and such, I want to have you each just talk a little bit about, your work a little bit more in detail. Mark, maybe I'll start with you in particular, because I know from what I've seen, and also from reading your bio, you've done commercial stuff. I've seen you at the Winter Carnival Parade many years. You took this picture of me with Bernie, our mascot, and Sarah, the snowy owl from Winter Carnival. All kinds of things like that, commercially. And I imagine that's all, being done digitally for you, but your real passion is also in film and black and white. So tell me a little bit about sort of the blend of work that, you do both in both of those fields, if I'm summarizing it somewhat correctly.
Well, when people stop by my studio and, they generally are looking at my artwork and that sort of thing. And we talk about that. And then they ask, well, what kind of photography, do you really focus on? What do you do? And my standard quick answer is anything that pays. That's the reality of being a commercial photographer, at least in a region like this. Years ago, perhaps if you're in a place like Manhattan, you could get very specialized and things like that. But, if you're going to live in areas like this, you've got to be able to do all kinds of different photography to survive, I think, professionally. So that's why the wide range, everything from doing, panoramic landscapes to the Winter Carnival Parade. You got to be able to do it all, I think as a commercial photographer. But my interests, when it comes to doing the fine art, that has quite a range too, from, everything from things like the landscape to the natural landscape, like we see an awful lot around here, but the urban landscape fascinates me too. I love spending time in cities. New York City, I've got, been working on a whole body of work of shot with a rather unusual film camera. It's a cheap plastic camera, is what I use to shoot all my imagery of New York City. So it's, it is quite a range. And I guess if I were to, what my interests are, it's just being a photographer. I like journalism. I worked for North Country Public Radio for a couple of years. I love telling people I was a photographer for radio. but it was obviously for their website, their news stuff and things like that. And I love going out and shooting stories. Doing the Winter Carnival thing for as many years as I did, that's like shooting, a big story each year. But it's nice to just go and be focused on what I call the fine art photography. And usually that is stuff that doesn't involve people, whether it be urban landscapes or rural landscapes or natural landscapes.
Let me ask Nancy that too, and then we'll go to Brendan. What are some of your favorite subjects, Nancy, over the years, and what's been the most rewarding for you in this career?
Oh, I think there's lots of rewards, but one thing I generally tell people is there was, and maybe there is still, but there was a whole world of people that thought I just did sports. And then there was another whole world of people that knew me as an Adirondack photographer and didn't realize that I did sports. So, going off to all these various Olympics and covering lots of different sports, winter and summer, certainly has its rewards. But also living in a place like this where you can go hiking and skating and, paddling and whatever, and bringing your camera and seeing what's out there and documenting what you see and other people out there. That's certainly also rewarding. But I do a lot of different clients. I generally don't do weddings. I do one maybe every once in a while. Every few years I'll do a wedding. Family portraits every once in a while, but that's not something that I do very often. And of course, that's what people kind of pinhole you with, is they say, oh, you must do weddings. Oh, you must do families. You must do this. And I kind of look at them and say no. And then I say, I thought you said you were a photographer. So anyway, I do, I work for different schools, commercial stuff, journalism, newspapers, magazines. And again, as Mark says, basically anybody who's interested will ever have me. I enjoy doing photography.
You also sometimes venture to the top of mountains with random people and take pictures of them standing on the. Yeah, I had to print this out too.
Yeah, snowshoeing in April.
Me,
New York
and
Times.
then Nancy took this picture of me and another guy on top of Mount Marcy one time.
And that was a New York Times assignment.
It was in the New York Times. Yeah.
Right, New York Times assignment. And I want you to know that every time I'm on Marcy in April, I think of you. And the last few years, I've been going up Marcy in April just because it's so pretty.
That's awesome. Now, Brendan, I don't have a picture of you to hold up that you've taken of me yet. So we got to work on that. Okay.
Sure.
But I do want to ask you kind of the same question, in terms of conservation photography, which has been, your focus. How do you, find the right subject to match kind of I'm not sure if maybe that's how it works out, but to match the story that you're hoping to tell, or, for the agency or organization that you're working with. How do you kind of blend the two to get that right image that you're looking for?
It really depends. A lot of the work people want me to do is just to give them photos that I've already taken, which I'm sure everyone gets those inquiries, and we all do, I'm sure, do some of that. But what I prefer to do is to work with nonprofits on specific projects where they have an outcome that they're looking to achieve, so that I have something to measure, the success of the project against long term, and know that the images are serving a specific purpose and not, being used on a website or an annual report, which is all, that's all good and important as well. So I think you mentioned Eagle Mountain. That's definitely one of the most rewarding projects that I've been involved with, where I had access to this 2,500 acre piece of land while it was still in private ownership, because we worked out a deal between the Wilderness Trust and the landowner to let me on that property while they were raising the money. And it was about a year. And I ended up knowing that place better than anyone at the Wilderness Trust by the end of it. Because it was spending time on the ground, scouting and poring over maps. And I flew over it a couple times to try and find the locations that were going to help tell the story of that property. Also find the wildlife and who was living there and what they were doing to take those images, which people tend to connect to a little bit more than than landscape. So it really varies by project. But there's a lot of work that goes into taking an image before you actually take the image. And so that's sort of how it all comes together. There's also just the opportunistic or fun things. I know I want to go and photograph a location, and I do that, and it's not for anyone specific. Maybe it'll be sold as a print someday. Maybe it'll serve some benefit. And then lastly, I do have some projects that are sort of entirely my own, that one recently, just to sort of keep my interest in photography, because I like to explore different aspects of it. I've been doing underwater photography, really trying to tie it back to the research I do, and finding ways for people to connect to a part of the Adirondacks that 99.9% of the people that come here will never see what's beneath the surface of an Adirondack lake or a river. So, yeah.
Can I ask where you've been going out to do that lately? I'm curious.
All over the place.
Yeah.
It's a challenging environment because a lot of Adirondack lakes don't have very high transparency, so you lose light very fast, and you need to be really close to things in order to get photos of them. And a lot of things that live underwater are suspicious of a large, funny-looking hairless mammal swimming around in their environment, so they tend to scatter pretty fast. But one of the most rewarding is getting some nice shots of brook trout on our streams, and that was over in a year and a half of work just to find a pool that I knew there would be fish in consistently, and that they wouldn't just leave when I got in. It was big enough, for me to work in that environment. So,
well, that's really cool. Exploring some new horizons there. I like that. I want to jump to a couple of questions in the chat, which will steer us, I think, a little bit towards, sort of the other part of this, which is, giving some folks that are listening some thoughts on, things they could do to, be better photographers. So Kim had asked, she's interested in hearing your take on what separates taking photos from photography as art. It's a kind of a big question, but anybody want to jump at that?
How long is this show? That's one of those endless, discussion kinds of questions that you can have. When does photography become art? It gets very philosophical, I think, after a while.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it really, though, comes down to the photographer or the artist's way of seeing, how they see something, how they look at something, and then recording it with the camera. As I mentioned, when I went to art school was when I really started to look at things a little differently than I had, which was much more traditional. I did a lot of pretty sunsets and fall colors, which I still do. But to get beyond that and really start to look at what makes a photograph interesting, and that's a tough question to pin down. I mean, I was 3 years in art school, and I don't know as I really came out with a specific answer for that one.
Mm-hmm.
But it really comes down to what you, the artist, the photographer, is seeing and visualizing. I'd be really curious to hear what the other two have to say about that.
I would say that for me, it's sort of in the intention behind it. I think of, pics as you're just like walking around waiting for something to happen versus thinking about the image that you want to create before you even pick the camera up, at least for the type of work I do anyways. I mean, I certainly have a camera with me every time I go outside and go hiking, but it's fairly rare that ever results in a photo that I would consider art. Those happen through a more thoughtful process, an intentional process.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, let me ask you that in a different way. Do you consider your photography, some of your photography work, art, or do you consider it photography?
I do consider some of it art, but it's more when somebody else looks at it and decides that it's art, not that I've decided that it's art.
Mhm.
I think it was Brendan just said, you kind of create this thing. You see plenty of photos where it's actually a great art picture where somebody's just walking around and just kind of pointing their camera in a direction and shooting, and they're capturing some pretty spectacular moments of whatever, of people living or the weather or all the above or whatever happening, on the other side of that lens. And it's not generally, maybe not on purpose and not real purposeful, but what they have captured is certainly creative and can be considered art.
Yep.
It's certainly very interesting. At least I find it to be very interesting.
Excellent. There was another question here from Paul who asked, how would you all say landscape photography is different from taking pictures of cityscapes with people in buildings? Can skills from one complement another? In what ways? If that makes sense, in the sense of what skills can you bring to both taking pictures of cityscapes and landscape photography? What would be some advice, some thoughts on that?
When I shoot in an urban setting, I really kind of approach it very similar to when I go out and shoot the Adirondack landscape. I look at it as a landscape. It's just got a bunch of buildings in it, and there are people in them. Although one person many years ago saw a body of work I had hung in a gallery and of all of New York City images, and they said, it's amazing, there's hardly any people in your pictures of New York City, specifically Manhattan, which is crawling with people. And I don't know as I was consciously waiting for people to get out of the image or whatever, but I look back at it and I thought about that, and I recognized that there weren't very many people in it. So I really approached my urban landscapes as just landscapes that just have buildings in them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's light. I think it's design. I think it's texture. I think it's color, and all of those things and fleeting moments. And, sometimes I will sit there and I'll take, 25 pictures of the same thing, just as things are happening, as the light changes, as somebody walks into it, as somebody walks out of it. It's a constantly changing scene. And that I think both landscapes are city and wilderness.
Do you have a favorite?
Favorite what?
Landscape, in terms of one or the other, more that you'd prefer to photograph? Or do they both have equal value depending on
where I am?
Yeah.
Depends on where I am. I'm happy to shoot in the city, or I'm happy to shoot in the wilderness. Depending on, what you're looking for, what you're seeing. I think it's always a new exploration.
Yeah. Good.
So I have a
Elaine.
question. So Brendan talked about sort of the sort of kind of plan shoot, the idea of going out, and I think Nancy, you spoke of this also, sort of you have a purpose, you're going to meet a particular need. You also said, Brendan, that you take your camera every time you go out and hike. So is that kind of a common practice? You're both looking for the sort of opportunistic shot that Nancy was talking about. Sometimes it could be beautiful, just happens to be there. And you're also doing the sort of planned excursion into this particular area, looking for this particular thing, or a site that you've been at before, you want to capture a different light kind of thing. So could you speak?
For me, it's both. Often when I'm just, I enjoy doing the more intentional work for landscapes. That's what I get excited about. When I'm out, just, I would say, recreating, but not focusing on photography, I'll have my camera with me, and sometimes that yields something. As Nancy suggested, there are moments that just happen, that you can capture. A lot of times, though, I will I will just snap a photo or a pic and more use that as a reference for, I want to come back to this location. I do a lot of, what I do a lot of is looking at where the sun is going to be throughout the year, to try and understand, how different landscape features are going to be lit, because that changes dramatically throughout the year. Some locations are going to look great, tend to look better in the winter. Some are going to look better in the summer. Some are going to look better sunrise, sunset, not necessarily looking into the sunrise or sunset, sometimes looking in the other direction. So that's what I like doing, is finding a spot and then really figuring out for that location, how is it going to be lit the best for what I see it could be. And then you have to play the game of the weather and everything else, because I've tried to photograph locations for years before all those things lined up. The light, the weather, maybe the fall foliage, whatever it is, snowstorm. So that's what I really enjoy doing, is sort of putting all those pieces together.
Great.
I would say that when I'm out there hiking or paddling, or when I have my cameras with me, which I also pretty generally have them either on me or in the car, that I'm documenting, not always, looking for something specific, but as Brandon says, sometimes you're out there taking pictures, you're documenting what's happening, but I'm also thinking, boy, this would look great in the winter if this looked like this, or, oh, that's a neat tree, I need to see that in a different season. So you're documenting and scouting at the same time, and maybe you do come back, and definitely paying attention to weather and light and seasons and all those things that change. And of course, you're really lucky if you can get them all on the same day or get the right day and be out there when you want to be. Doesn't always happen. And sometimes you're 10 minutes late, who knows?
And
Go ahead, Mark.
Nancy just said something that is a good point when she says, she referred to generally she has her cameras with her wherever she goes. And that's one piece of advice I would give to anybody, is always carry your camera with you wherever you go. I could go through my studio here and point out photographs that I got because I happened to have the camera with me. I wasn't out intending to be shooting. I was driving someplace. I saw something, pulled over, went back, and it's because I had my camera with me. So taking the camera with you, having it, pretty close by all the time, I think will increase tremendously the opportunity of getting some great photographs.
Let's talk about, what kind of camera gear you use. I mean, I know we could, like you said earlier, Mark, probably could go another hour on this question, but, and I know many of you have probably used many different kinds over the years, but what works for you? And maybe that's a question that also depends on, where you are and what your goal is, and, what the project is or the assignment or interest is. But Mark, why don't you jump on that one first? Camera gear.
All those things you just said. I have several different formats that I work with. I still shoot on film for some of my fine art stuff. I use a film panorama camera. I use what's called the Holga camera, which is a $35 plastic film camera, cheap plastic camera that has some really unique characteristics that I like working with. I have a 4x5 large format camera that I like working with. When it comes to my film stuff, those are generally the three cameras that I like working with. I don't remember the last time I shot with a 35 millimeter film camera. If I'm going to do something with a 35, I'm probably just going to pick up my digital single lens reflex. And I use two digital cameras, a single lens reflex and a mirrorless, small mirrorless camera, mainly because that's small, it's quiet. It doesn't scream photographer when you pull it up to take your, use it or something like that. And it's light and you can take it anywhere easily. So it really depends on what I'm shooting. I don't take my film large format camera out to shoot Winter Carnival.
Right.
That's what I use my two digital cameras for. So it really depends on what you're shooting. And for my carry around, always have it with me because you never know what you're going to run into. It is my 2 digital cameras that I always have with me. Usually if I take the other cameras out, I'm specifically going out to photograph something. I've got something pretty specific in mind that I'm working on. So yeah, it's a wide range of different formats that I work with.
Let me ask Brendan. Same thing. What's in your backpack? What's in your camera bag?
Yeah, for a long time it was Nikon DSLRs. I loved them, and that was what I used for really up until the beginning of this year when I sold all my Nikon gear and bought a Sony mirrorless camera, and that's the system in it now. And it's I think with any of it, to me the camera's become like, I actually kept one of my Nikon bodies just because I like to hold on to it. I know where all the buttons are and it feels good in my hand, and it's sort of like a comfortable old friend to take out, and it has some uses still for me. But I think for the type of work I do, which is landscapes and then increasingly faster action stuff with wildlife, and I've started a project. I've started photographing dogs lately, which is a whole nother story. But I found that the mirrorless systems, the autofocus in them was better than the Nikons that I was working with previously.
That's interesting. Can you tell us what the dog story is in a nutshell?
I love dogs, and I had a dog that passed away 2 years ago that was like, he went with me everywhere. Every time I did landscape photography, he was there. I very rarely ever took a photo of him. Wasn't really interested in photographing dogs. He got diagnosed with cancer, and so I started taking a picture of him every day and sharing it online. And apparently that is a very touching thing to do, and made a lot of people feel sort of helped them through their own versions of grief. And then I got a puppy during the pandemic and decided I was going to try and take a photo of him every day for his entire life, which I'm not sure anyone has ever done. So I'm at day 508, I think, of that photography journey. And it's very foreign to what I have done up until this point. And it's been fun because it's made me learn things about photography that I didn't know, because everything I used to shoot pretty much just stayed still, and I had all the time in the world to figure it all out, but not with a puppy or even a dog. So yeah, that's the short story. Yeah.
Really interesting project. Are you sharing those photos each day, or are you going to save it until kind of the end? And
no, I post them on my Facebook page. Some of them are taken with my phone because it's hard to take a picture every day, and you get home from work late at night. And it's been a really fun project photography wise, because there's a lot of challenges associated with doing something like that, motivationally and technically and all of that. So
commitment alone. Yeah, that's cool. Nancy, let me jump back to you on our question about gear and that sort of thing. I mean, you've had a long career. What's worked for you the best over the years? What's your go-to setup or that sort of thing?
Right now I'm using Canons 35 millimeter. Have used Nikons in the past. Have gone back and forth a little bit between the two of them. When everything started to go digital, I was using Nikons, but then I started hearing that Canon was better, so I started buying some Canon equipment. So I was using two different systems at the same time. And then when Canon got way ahead, I decided I had to go one way or the other, because some of the equipment that I would need, the big sports lenses that cost many thousands of dollars, I really couldn't afford to have, one of each system. So I stuck with Canon, and that's where I am now. I have thought about going back to Nikon numerous times because I thought their glass was better. The quality of their glass focused better. Have not gone mirrorless, have thought about it. And I do have some older cameras, film cameras that are medium format. And of course I use my cell phone.
A couple of you have mentioned mirrorless, and I'm not a very skilled photographer by any stretch. What does that mean? What is the benefit of a mirrorless camera for those that might not know?
Well, mirrorless cameras is smaller, lighter, and quieter for one thing. That's the primary reason that I got it. When I got my mirrorless camera, I was getting a new, I shoot with a Nikon D750, and I was getting a new Nikon single lens, digital single lens reflex camera. And I got one of these lenses, the zoom lens that just covers just about everything, but it didn't go really wide angle. And I like shooting with a wide angle. And I thought for another $1,000, I can get a Nikon wide angle lens, or I can get one of these Fuji, I think it's the EX2 or something like that, mirrorless cameras already with the lens on it. And it also was a zoom, but it went pretty wide angle. So I opted to do that. I was really glad that I did, because I liked the smaller, lighter, less intimidating to whoever else I'm out there photographing aspect of the camera. Like I said, it doesn't scream photographer like when you pull up a digital single lens reflex. That just really makes a statement just when you bring it up to your eye. Whereas this looks like a little snapshot camera. And that's one of the reasons I like it. It doesn't have quite the high resolution that my Nikon D750 does, but it covers things pretty well. So that's the biggest thing from my perspective: smaller, lighter, and very quiet.
Yeah, and mine is not small and light, but it is quiet. It is a full frame with the interchangeable lenses and everything. It's just, it basically just removes the whole mirror mechanism out of the camera, which for a long time was a disadvantage in many ways, because there was dedicated sensors or there are dedicated sensors in DSLRs to focus the camera, and they're really good. And mirrorless don't have them, and so they came out, they were a bit behind, but now they've really caught up, and you can move your focus point on my camera anyway, anywhere in the frame, whereas with a DSLR you're sort of constrained to the middle portion of the frame. And so, it's we could talk about this, I'm sure, and this could be another 2-hour program. But
tune in next week. No.
Yeah.
That's a good point, though. I just wanted to, ask that. And let me just ask generally. I know we've touched on some of these things during the conversation, but and we've got about 10 minutes left here before we wrap up. And just a reminder too that if any other folks want to ask some questions, you can post them in the chat here, and I'll try and get them in before we end. But so many people, are going out there and just have their iPhones and are capturing some, when you see it on Facebook or wherever, pretty cool images of the Adirondacks and those beautiful landscapes that we love here in the North Country. But, there are benefits to doing it in other ways too, and to getting into it a little bit more. But so what are some other tips, other thoughts you all might have for people that are kind of interested in making it their photos just a little bit better, just a little bit sharper? Maybe it's in the preparation and what they do in advance. Maybe it's in the timing. Any other thoughts, advice you want to offer to people that those novices or beginners out there like me, or even people that have been doing it for a while?
Well, I'd suggest to always try and keep it simple, especially if you're starting out. iPhones or cell phones are a nice, basic, simple way to get started in photography, and you can really stay focused on what makes an interesting image. I don't do much with an iPhone. I carry one with me, and I'll use it if I have to. But generally speaking, I like my cameras for myself. That's what I like to work with. But I remember just a few years ago, Apple was advertising, taking out full page ads where they put one full page photograph of what everybody I'm sure would agree is a piece of art shot on iPhones. And I had just seen some magnificent iPhone photography. So, and there's a lot of things you can do with them, filters and stuff like that. You can do interesting things with those. But So you can, certainly that's a simple thing to start out with. Most everybody has one of those things. But I would urge people to keep it simple, and it's very easy to be intimidated by all the toots and whistles that are on some of these digital cameras now. A good portion of which I don't even use on the cameras. I think they put them on them because they can put them on them. I don't often see what the value of some of the stuff that's on all these cameras. Don't let that stuff intimidate you. Just stay with the very basics. Keep it simple. And then as you as a photographer grow, you're going to start thinking, I'd like to be able to do this, or I wish I could do that. That's when you want to explore what your camera can do, or getting other programs in software or different kinds of cameras that you can do that kind of stuff. But start out keeping it simple and being focused on the composition of what makes an interesting photograph, and not all the technical stuff that comes with these cameras.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, Brendan, anything you'd add in terms of some basic thoughts on how to approach a subject or a landscape when you're in the field?
I always think about the post-processing, which we haven't spoken about here. So it's having the software that you need to work on your photos afterwards. And I know when I'm shooting, I just kind of look at it and say, oh, I'm going to have to do that, or I can make this better by doing this. So I expect to do a lot of post-processing. Brendan was saying that, he spends a lot of time planning ahead and, doing things ahead of taking a photo. Well, after you start taking photos and you start editing them, you're going to be spending a lot of time processing those photos as well.
What do you use for processing, software, or what? Could you speak to that a little bit?
I have Lightroom and Photoshop.
Yeah. Good. Brendan, jump in.
I guess in addition to what both Mark and Nancy said, and I've taught some workshops over the years, and I think really understanding the effect of shutter speed and aperture on an image and practicing using those, changing them intentionally and using them. I think once you understand that, it becomes a lot easier to take whatever vision you have in your head and turn it into a reality in the camera. And even if you sort of have a basic understanding of it, go out and intentionally play with the depth of field and freezing action or creating motion blur and all those things by really controlling the camera. And I like what Mark said, because I think the iPhone removes almost all of that from the decision making, which is nice because then you can just focus on composition. So I think you got to kind of be doing both of those, and it's when you've got all of those pieces together that you can really be creative with what you're doing.
Yeah. Just as we wind down, I wanted to ask too, as you've all done some pretty amazing things with photography over the years. So I want to ask kind of a two-part question that's you can either end with one or end with the other. Is there something that you kind of look back on now that you wish you knew, when you started getting into photography? Like, what's one thing now I know this, but 15, 20 years ago, I didn't know it. And then second part of the question is, I think, we'd be remiss without asking maybe what's been your, photograph or subject you've photographed or thing you've photographed that you've really felt like you got the most out of it, that it's been the most rewarding for you. It might be one shot, maybe it's a series of shots, maybe it's a whole project. So let me start with Nancy first on that. So Nancy, what's one thing you wish you knew, and then what's maybe been the highlight or highlights for you over your career?
Starting out as a photographer and going to Syracuse University, they never required that we take any business courses. They always assumed that whoever was going through their programs was probably either going to work for a newspaper or a magazine. So they would have a salaried job, or they'd apprentice with a studio person and learn that and pick up everything from that studio person. So when I went freelance after the 1980 Olympics, I kind of had to figure out, heck, how do I do this? What do I charge? What are the rules of this game? So I would suggest taking some business courses and figuring out how the business of photography works, especially if you do want to derive some income from it or make a living from it, or even just sell photos. Figure out all those rules.
Yeah.
I think the photo that might stand out, certainly among a lot of people, is when I did the aerial photos of all the canoes and kayaks for the 1 square mile of hope. So
I remember that.
You're right. It's the aerial view of thousands of canoes and kayaks that had rafted up together in inlet on Fourth Lake. And so that went pretty viral pretty quickly. It was a 2-page spread in Sports Illustrated. It was in National Geographic. It was in Canoe and Kayaking. It was in a whole bunch of international paddling publications, and it just went and went and went. And I'm still getting requests from people to buy prints of that image. And it's actually, there were 3 images that I made available, but there's 2 of them from that shoot that were very popular. And neither of those, they were ones that were just edge to edge, boats. But there was also a request for from that shoot, which was from a seaplane, to show all the water that was around the raft, because it was required for the project that I was shooting for. It had to be a floating raft, and it could not be touching anything. The people couldn't be touching a dock or anything. So I was required to shoot the whole big thing with the lake around it. So when I did that assignment, I shot many pictures in a very short time with 2 different cameras, just going back and forth between the 2 of them, and knowing that the pictures that I was really liking were the tighter ones with no edge, with no water, but just the patterns of all the boats and the colors and all that. So I think that's the one that stands out right now.
It sounds like art to me. So,
Yeah.
that's cool.
It's a fleeting moment. I just happened to be there.
Wonderful. Okay, Mark, you're next. So one thing you wish you knew back in the day, and then maybe a moment or 2 that's been a real highlight for you.
Well, it's what Nancy said. I went to art school and they gave you absolutely no sense at all of what to do business-wise. Absolutely zero. When I started out, I was absolutely clueless. I was making it up as I went. I had no idea how to, what kind of rates to charge, because I started out, basically freelancing as well. And it would have been nice to have had a better understanding of that aspect of photography for me as a commercial, professional photographer. Boy, standout moments. I don't know. I guess there's probably been quite a few. I'll mention one. I'm a skier. I have a lifetime of skiing. I'm a certified ski instructor, and I still ski. And skiing has always been an important part of my life. And I do remember when I was a lot younger going to the Warren Miller films when they would come to the area. And I've realized that I shifted to being a photographer when I watched the Warren Miller films, more for the cinematography than it was for the skiing. And that's what intrigued me more. And I used to look at skiing magazines and thought, wouldn't it be cool to be a ski photographer? And when I had my first feature, not just a photograph in it with a byline, with a credit, but an actual byline in Skiing Magazine, which had 3 2-page spreads in it, all shot with my panoramic camera of the Whiteface Lake Placid area. For me, that was pretty cool. That was kind of a high point of putting both my skiing and my photography together. That was kind of a cool moment. There's been a lot, it's, as a profession, it's offered me a lot of pretty cool opportunities. And I could go on for quite a while about all the different neat opportunities I've had because of this work. But that's just one that pops in my mind, stands out.
I think we could probably do a whole program on stories you all could tell us about, good and bad, life in the field, as photographers. Brendan, let me ask you the same question to kind of wrap up too. What do you, what have you learned over the years? What do you wish you kind of knew back in the day? And then, what's been your, favorite shot over the years?
I think I I wish I would have known, or my advice to anyone that's really focused on landscapes is just to be persistent. If you're not doing, Mark and Nancy do a lot of commercial work that helps, support them as full-time photographers. I tend not to do that. And so if you're looking at selling landscape photos or working, landscape images with magazines, and it takes a while to build up, a reputation as a photographer to be able to make those connections. I'm sure that if someone could do it a lot faster than I have, if they put all of their focus and energy into it. But when I started, I thought it was going to be easier than it was, which is not surprising in hindsight that that it's something that takes a long time. My favorite image, there's a fish called a bowfin, and it's not a fish that many people probably love. It's maybe not even I don't even know if it's considered a game fish that people, go out fishing for. It looks like sort of like an eel. It has it's dorsal, and as all of its fins are connected. And it's a native fish here in the Adirondacks. It's considered an ancient fish. It's been around for a really long time. And a few years ago, I decided I wanted to photograph one of these fish, and they live in these really mucky, marshy areas. And I spent the better part of 2 weeks with a paddleboard in a marsh trying to figure out how to get a photo of one of these things, and eventually did it. And it's one of the images I'm most proud of. And I shared it online, and this is completely obscure and probably means almost nothing to everyone on this call, but one of the biggest bowfin fish scientists in the world saw the image and said, that's the most amazing photo of a bowfin. And then started reaching out to me, trying to figure out, how did you do that? How did you get a photo of one of these fish that way in their environment? It hadn't been caught on a lure or anything. So, that's my proudest image to date so far.
That's amazing. That's patience, persistence, all kinds of things coming together. And is that, I'm guessing, one that folks could find on your website, or if they Google?
Yeah, you can see. On my
website.
On my website, you can browse by species and all kinds of things. You can go see what a bowfin looks like if you want.
I've got to check it out, definitely. And I did want to, plug too, for folks that are curious to see some of the things we've been talking about. And the one tough thing about doing this on Zoom is, we're not in person. We're not able to show as much of what we're talking about as we'd like to with such a visual thing. But, go to markkurtzphotography.com, go to brendanwiltsey.com. You can also Google their names. And Nancy doesn't have her own site, but you will find her very easily if you Google her name and see her body of work. There's a lot of sites featuring her work too. So please do that. I want to give a quick shout out to the North Country Community College Foundation for sponsoring our program. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note that many of you have touched on the importance of the business aspect of your careers, and that not only do we have a great photography program as part of our art department here at the college, but we have a great business program too. So if you want to know some more about the business angle of things and learn some of the ropes there, and also learn about photography and fine art and digital as well, you can log onto our website or look up Tina or Elaine and find out some more about that. So anyway, Mark, Nancy, Brendan, this has been amazing. I want to thank you all for sharing your time and wisdom and advice with everybody. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back again next week with another edition of North Country Live. We'll be focused on pottery this time around. We're going to learn a little bit more about the pottery skills of some local people, how it's both art and business for a lot of them too. So kind of a nice little parallel here with what we're talking about today. And you can find out more about that at nccc.edu/live. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll see you next time. Again, Mark, Nancy, thanks again. Thanks, Brendan.
Adios.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a good night. We'll see you.